Hi everyone, it's Stephanie here and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be creating 3 cards, and on these cards we're going to keep the design exactly the same. I'm just going to be changing up the different colors that I'm going to be using. So the idea I kind of had for these cards was I wanted to use the cascading scallop stencil because it reminds me of a mermaid, and I wanted to create a background and then actually have the mermaid stamped image on top of the background in pretty much the same colors as the background. So what I'm going to do first is create the backgrounds on all 3 of the cards. And I want to have an ombre effect with my ink, so I'm going to be using 3 different colors of distress inks on each of the card designs that I'm going to create. So before I do any of the inking, I want to make sure that I have my cardstock panel as well as my stencil securely held down on my work surface. I don't want anything to shift when I'm adding the ink, so I really like to make sure I have everything adhered down on all sides. I know I'm going to trim the panel down a tiny bit, so I did use some of the post-it tape on the sides of the panel. When I add the ink to the panel, you're not going to get ink underneath where that post-it tape is. So keep that in mind if you want the entire panel to be covered. You don't want to have any of that post-it tape on the panel underneath. So now that I have everything securely held down, I'm going to start to add the ink, and I like to start with the darkest color at the bottom. And what I'm kind of going for is an ombre look on each of these different panels, so I'm staying with very similar colors on each one. So this first one here, I'm starting with Mermaid Lagoon, and I'm taking my ink blending tool and just putting that right into that distress ink color, and then I'm bringing it directly to the panel. Now I really want this to be saturated in color, so I'm adding quite a bit of color onto the panel. And then I'm going to kind of fade it off as I get towards the middle because I know that I want to come in with my next color, which is going to be a little bit lighter. So that is going to be the peacock feathers, and I am speeding this up as I add the ink. It's just basic ink blending. There isn't really much to it. You just want to add your first color, kind of lighten it as you get near to the area where you're going to add your second color, and then repeat that same process when you're bringing in your third color, which is cracked pistachio. So this blend is Mermaid Lagoon, peacock feathers in the middle, and cracked pistachio at the very top. For these panels, I'm using the My Favorite Things No Line Coloring cardstock. I really love the smoothness of this cardstock, and I like the way the ink kind of applies to it. It gives a really nice smooth finish. Now for the next one here, I want to do a green look on this one. So I'm starting first with my Lucky Clover Distress ink. And once again, I'm starting with this darkest color at the very bottom. I have everything completely secured down once again. And I'm just going to bring the ink directly to the stencil and kind of blend it over top of the stencil to bring all of that color to my cardstock panel. I'm repeating the exact same process as the first one. I am kind of lifting my blending tool as I get towards the middle just to kind of lighten up that color. And then I'm bringing in the second color. Now when I did bring in the mauve lawn at first, I was a little bit worried that the 2 greens didn't go that well together, the Lucky Clover and the mauve lawn. But I ended up really liking this blend of greens once I kind of worked all the colors together and got everything really nicely blended. It ended up looking really nice in the finished card. So now you can see our first 2 panels. We have the aqua and blue one as well as the green one. And now I want to bring in a pop of color and do one with pinks and reds. So for this one here, I'm doing the exact same thing once again with the ink and the stencil over the panel. But for this one, I'm starting with the picked raspberry at the very bottom, which is a nice dark pink color. And then I was going to originally go into the abandoned coral, but I did switch that up and ended up going into the worn lipstick first. And then I added the abandoned coral at the very top of this panel. So once again, I will speed through the addition of the other 2 colors. It's the same process as the bottom of the stencil where I showed you me applying the pink. I'm just going in with that worn lipstick in the middle and blending the 2 colors together. And then I'm going to take the abandoned coral at the top, which is a little bit lighter than the worn lipstick, but they ended up being kind of similar in color. So for this one here, I didn't get as much of an ombre look as I did on the first 2, but I still liked how it turned out. So now I have 3 completed panels. I have the pink and red one, I have the blue and aqua color one, and I also have that really vibrant green one. I decided to add water to all of these panels just to kind of distress them a little bit, since the water will react with the distress inks and kind of lift some of that color off. So I like to just take my water spritzer and spritz it directly into my hand, and then I just kind of flick it over top of the panels to kind of drop some smaller droplets of water. I find if you spray it directly on, the water droplets tend to be a little bit larger, so this way just lets me control that water a little bit more. So I dabbed it off with a paper towel, and now I have all 3 of my panels ready to go. Now for the mermaids that I want to add to these, I've already went ahead and stamped these out, so these are from the Mermazing stamp set, and I've stamped all 3 of these with hybrid extreme black ink. Now at first I wasn't sure if I wanted to color these strictly with Copic markers or do kind of a different fun technique with them. And I decided to go with something a little bit different than I normally do. So what I'm doing first is I am putting Post-it tape over top of their arms so I don't accidentally get ink on those. So my plan here is to create the same ombre look on the mermaid tails that I created on the background. So I wanted them to be the exact same color. I really want these cards to be very monochromatic. I want the mermaids to kind of blend in with the background. So I wanted to keep the exact same colors on the base of that mermaid tail. So what I'm doing is I'm just going in with that darkest color first, which is the Mermaid Lagoon at the very bottom. And then I'm using the exact same colors in the same order that I did on the panels. So for this one here, I went in with some peacock feathers in the middle, and then I added some cracked pistachio at the top. And I did make sure as I was adding that ink, especially at the very top of the mermaid tail, that I didn't go too far up so I didn't get any ink on her stomach. And I also wanted to leave a little bit of that white. I really wanted it to have a really good ombre effect and go really super light at the top. So I'm just repeating the same process with the other two mermaids. I'm using the exact same ink colors that I used on the pink and red panel as well as the green one. And I'm just adding those ink colors to give those mermaids an ombre look as well. And then once I'm done, I can peel off that Post-it tape, and now I have three mermaids that have their tails colored, but the rest of the body is kind of plain. And since I have the ink kind of all over around the outside of the tail, I decided to fussy cut them with my scissors rather than using the dies. So now to finish off these mermaids, I do need to color in the rest of their body, so I'm doing some very quick Copic coloring. I'm not even doing any blending, I'm simply using one color. So I used E00 for all of their skin, and then I went in with a similar Copic color to the distress inks I had used in their tails to color in their top and their little star in their hair. And then I also colored in their hair with some browns, the exact same colors on all three mermaids. So I just kind of skipped through it. I didn't do anything fancy here. I used simply one color except for their hair. I added a little bit of a darker color. So their hair ended up being E55 and E57. Okay, so now that I have the mermaids colored, I have my backgrounds created, we can start to assemble our cards. So I have card bases that match all of the backgrounds that we've created as well as the mermaids. Like I mentioned, I want to keep these pretty monochromatic, so I picked very similar colors for the card base as well. And now we're going to do some stamping for the sentiment. So I have here our new heavyweight translucent vellum. This is 105-pound vellum. It's super thick. It's almost like cardstock. And I absolutely love this stuff. I love how thick it is. I love how well it embosses. It just looks really nice on cards. And I thought it would be a great way to kind of separate the mermaids from the backgrounds. Since we're keeping them the same color, I don't want to kind of lose that mermaid in the background. To create a little bit of interest, I decided to stamp the sentiment in the same shape as the circle, so I just positioned it onto my acrylic block and kind of just put it on top of the circle to get the same shape. And now I'm stamping it onto each of those circles with some Versamark ink. Versamark is just a clear sticky ink that's going to hold the embossing powder that we're adding because I want to have a nice white embossed sentiment on each of these circles. So I'm repeating the same process for all three of them. I'm stamping the sentiment, adding the white embossing powder, and then I'm using my heat tool to heat that up. Now with vellum, you want to make sure that you are kind of moving your heat tool quite a bit. You don't want to warp the vellum. But with this thicker vellum, you definitely have a little bit more time to be able to heat emboss that without any of that warping happening. Vellum can be a little bit tricky to adhere since you can see the adhesive through it. So what I'm doing is I'm laying it onto my panel to figure out where I want to position it. And then I'm adding the mermaid directly to that vellum circle with adhesive. And then I'll flip it over and use liquid glue and add that only behind the areas where I have the mermaid image as well as the embossed sentiment. And this is going to help camouflage that adhesive and allow me to adhere the circle directly onto this panel. Once I have it on there, I do like to put something on top to make sure that it's fully adhered. So I'm just going to add an acrylic block onto this mermaid piece here, and I'm going to set it aside to dry while I put the other two together. So for these ones here, I'm doing the exact same process once again. I'm adding the mermaid to the vellum circle, and then I'm adding that circle onto the panel with the adhesive in behind the mermaid and the stamped sentiment. So now I have the last one here done, and now we can trim off the little extra piece that we have on the vellum circle, and then these panels can be added to the card bases. For my cards, I decided I didn't want a lot of dimension, so I just used regular adhesive and adhered everything flat to the card. But if you do want a little bit of added dimension, you can use foam adhesive either behind the mermaid or the main panel before adding it to the card base. For my card bases, I decided to use Summer Splash, Limelight, and Ripe Raspberry cardstock so they would all match the panels and the mermaids. And then to finish these off, I'm adding some clear crystals to each of the designs in the exact same spot, just to kind of mimic the look of droplets of water. And of course, every mermaid should have a little bit of sparkle, so I'm going to use my Nuvo glitter pen, which is just a clear sparkly glitter, and I'm going to add this to the star in her hair as well as her top and tail on all three of them. And then I'm going to use my crystal glaze, and I'm going to add that just to the star on her hair, just to give it a little bit of dimension and a glossy finish. And then once I have that done, we have finished our trio of Ombre Mermaid cards. We have these beautiful backgrounds with the mermaids that completely match, but we have that great vellum kind of tucked underneath of the mermaids to help separate them from the card. I hope you enjoyed today's video and got some ideas for different ways to use stencils with the mermaid stamps, and I hope to see you in another video soon. Thanks so much for watching.